Why does it hurt so good? Anima Beyond Fantasy, a game created in Spain and called Beyond Fantasy because they couldn't call it Final Fantasy. If you know me, you know that this is my favorite tabletop RPG of all time. If you're one of my best friends, you know it's the game I hate the most. Kind of a contradiction, I know. Where to begin? Game mechanics. Generally, it's played with a fantasy setting, fantasy feel. You have magic, you have sword and sorcery, you have swords and shields, you have a lot of different weapons. If you're a weeaboo, you have katanas, you have najinatas, you have nodashis, and all that stuff. Alright. You need simple stuff to play this game. 2d10s. Two dice, two 10-sided dice. Easy. Or, more properly put, at the percentage. You know, games like D&D and D and Pathfinder, you roll the die and you add a modifier. Anima is similar in that aspect. You roll the D percentage plus any modifier you have. Simple. Albeit big numbers, because you can generate a number from 1 to 100 plus any modifier you have, which eventually can be 248, for example. Um, Something that didn't quite agree with a lot of my friends. Me, I don't mind it that much. It's rudimentary math. All right. But that's when you're gonna do an attack roll, or you're gonna have a skill check, or you're gonna do a saving throw. You have your characteristics, you know, your strength, constitution, all that. When you do a characteristic roll, for other games usually is, games that have modifiers is the dice plus the modifier. Not here. When you do a characteristic roll, you roll a d10, a single d10, and you have to roll under your attribute. And that's fine. Other games are like that, roll under attribute. But generally, you're rolling for high numbers. You're just rolling the percentage plus the modifier and hoping to get the biggest number you can. Um, when it's characteristic rolls, you roll 1d10 and you roll below. So already it's getting kind of clunky mixing those two together. Alright, moving on. This game has fumbles, which honestly I'm a fan of. I like games that have fumbles where you can royally screw up something. Awesome. What's the problem? The problem is the fumbles are vague. You get a fumble on a roll of 1, 2, or 3. After that, the game master rolls another D percentage to see the fumble level. The higher it is, the worse off. But there's no general rule, not really, unless it's a combat fumble or a defensive fumble. That's where you that's where the book actually gives you sort of rules for the fumbles, and even then they're still vague, and it's more like the game master decides what happens, but generally he should do this. Not a bad thing, but then if you have a game master that's a jerk, it's like, oh, you fumble, you fell down, tripped, and impaled yourself on the sword and died. Yeah. Or you sneak around. I fumbled the sneak roll. Everybody notice you, roll initiative, you're getting attacked by 50 guards. You have the other side where you have a game master is extremely lax. You fumbled, oh, one guy noticed you, but he's not that strong, so whatever. I would have I like this game a lot. I would have liked it for them to have an actual rule when it came to the fumble rules. Alright, so the mechanics are simple enough. It's just roll die, add modifier, done and done. But you have those big numbers and you have those really weird fumble rules. And the more you play this game, the more you're gonna realize you need a calculator to play this game. And we'll enter that when we go into combat because you have to actually use percentage. Yeah, at least it's not another game that I know around there that uses square roots. That's for another day. Alright, so during character creation, what do? You generate your characteristics. Usually games have, the characteristics strength, dexterity, I've already mentioned that. Anima has 8 of them. Strength, dexterity, agility, constitution, intelligence, power, willpower, and perception. Alright. Dexterity and agility, I understand it's a little bit redundant, but that's fine. That's how the designer decided to design the game. Power and willpower is also kind of weird. If you read the descriptions, they also clash a little bit. Then you have perception. Perception is just the senses, how good you are at perceiving things. And honestly, you only use it for 3 skills. I might be oversimplifying it, but honestly, the game could go without perception as a characteristic. That's fine. They usually range from 1 to 10, they could get a little bit higher, and they have modifiers. Alright? Then you have a characteristic called presence. It's basically how strong your soul is. And you use it for your saving throws to be able to resist certain spells, psychic abilities, poison, diseases, and stuff like that. Well, that stat is called presence. Alright. Presence governs a couple of resistances. A couple of them which are redundant, and this is one of the main problems in this game. A lot of the core things are a bit redundant. For example, you have your physical resistance is to resist physical things, but then you also have poison resistance, which is to resist poisons, and then you have your disease resistance, which is to resist diseases. All 3 of those are governed by constitution. I might not know that much about game design, but I am, however, designing a game, and I have read a lot of different games. That seems redundant. Why not just turn them into physical resistance? And it's fine if you did it that way, but it's too much for the players to keep track of. And in role playing games, usually you don't want to have that much micromanaging. Unless your character is based around micromanaging, for example, someone that specializes in summoning in any game. Not only in this game, but in any game. You're a summoner, you have a lot of different creatures, you micromanage each one. That's cool. But when you have to micromanage your character sheet, everybody has to micromanage your character sheet. Something to watch out for. Alright. Trust me, I'm gonna get into good points, but right now I really want to get over the bad points of the game because again, this is my favorite game of all time. It just has so many inherent problems in it. Another attribute or characteristic you have is appearance. Alright? And literally, what appearance does is how pretty your character is. You have 2 ways of how to generate your character's appearance. You can either roll one 10-sided dice, so you can either be a 1 or a 10, or you can just choose. Why give me then the chance to roll a 10-sided die? I mean, alright, I want to randomize how pretty my character is, or it can just be a 10. And that's one of the things my players told me. It's like if I can choose, can I be a 10? And I'm like, what? He said there's no repercussion. And I'm like, literally, the game does not say anything about the appearance characteristic. It's like, okay, so I'm a 10. Like, all right. Other people decided to roll, and then I would one that was a 4, I believe. So, I mean, I understand that you can use it in role play situations, but at that point, scrap the appearance thing and just tell me, is your character ugly? Is your character pretty? How pretty are they? How ugly are they? Are they pretty, but are they jerks? You know, all those things. So it's a bit weird. And yes, I'm bashing on it. And I'm rambling and I'm ranting. Sure. But it's just, my disdain for this game, it's on a personal level. And I'll get on that at the end of the video. Bear with me. So you have your abilities, your attack rolls, your defense rolls, your magical abilities, and you have creation points that you use for advantages or flaws or disadvantages. Obviously, if you take flaws, you get more creation points for more advantages. Not bad, although it's open to a lot of cheese. A lot of people can, make a broken character just based around their creation points, but it's manageable. So that's no really big problem. Alright. Skills. And here is where I notice, how long was it? 2008, I believe I got this book. So a long time ago, when I started reading this book and I fell in love with it, the first glaring problem smacked me in the face. The skills. 38 in total, which inherently is not a bad thing, but then you have really weird things happening. For example, you have a lot of redundant abilities. Acrobatics and athleticism. I'm looking at you. And I understand that other games separate them, but a game like this, where you have limited points to put where you want to go, try to simplify them a little bit more. Because then, I'm really good at running, but I'm not that good at swimming. Which happens. But in this game, the game itself tells you if you're a character, you're a cut above. So treat it as a character a cut above. Alright. Another skill I want to talk about, and a very infamous skill, a very infamous secondary ability in this game, is called style. What does style do, you may ask? Inherently, mechanically, nothing. It's a skill you can put points in, but it doesn't do anything. It's a passive skill. And what it's worth is based only on the game master. Style is basically how cool your character is. Yay. The game itself says if you have a high enough style, if you're fighting under a thunderstorm, every hit of your sword or weapon is gonna hit every time a lightning strikes in the far distance. Really cool stuff. Don't give me a skill to do that though. So I don't want to spend my level up resources just for that. Unless the game itself was entirely just a lot of skills that you put on fluff stuff, which honestly is a very interesting game idea. But this game is not that. This game you have a lot of crunch, a lot of concrete things. So yeah, style. And I remember they call in the forum boards they used to say that the acrobatic warrior is the most broken class in the entire game because every time you level up in that class, it gives you free bonuses on style. So yeah, how stylish you are while doing anything. Whoop de doo. The game does have races, but basically you're everybody's human. But there are races that are called the Nephilim. And those of you savvy in mythology know that Nephilim are the half angel, half humans, giants, depending on what Bible you're reading or what mythology you're following. Alright, so you have light Nephilims and dark Nephilims. All of them have different abilities, cool stuff. They have a penalty though, the level adjustment, if you will. They lose XP per session. At the end of the session, Game Master grants XP, but the Nephilims gain less XP than straight shooting humans. Humans don't gain anything at all, not even a bonus advantage. Honestly, I would. There's no reason not to pick a Nephilim unless you're the type of game master that tells you if you're playing a human, you get an extra advantage at character creation. All right, but they're cool. The races, they're cool. I like their flavor. Even though you have dark and light, not necessarily as good and evil. It's just the primordial energies that surround them and the energies they have most of. They're very flavorful. Basically, two of them you can just tell that they're the elves and the dark elves because that's basically what they are. And but they get each one gets a different ability. My favorite one is one called the Ebudan. Now the Ebudan starting off doesn't really have any ability. They have something called the Suaman, and what the Suaman is, they have a calling in life. What that calling is in the game masters in your hands. You have to sit down and decide what it's gonna be. Once the Suaman is completed, however, the Ebudan gains wings and gains a fly speed, and they become immune to all attacks that are not energy based or can affect energy. So imagine it this way: you're playing Pathfinder, you completed a plot point, you gain a fly speed with perfect maneuverability, and you become incorporeal, and everything you wear or use has ghost touch. Pretty nifty stuff. But that's the thing. You need to complete your Suoman, and if your game master's a prick, you're never gonna complete it. Yeah, I'm not a big fan of games that put so much in the game master's hands because you never want to run into that guy, into that game master. Same to say for games that put too much in the player's hands because then you're gonna meet that player. You just don't want to meet those guys. I like games that are structured. They give you rules. I believe in rule number one, have fun. Rule number two, the rules are there to be guidelines, not straitjackets. I do believe that, but I like to have rules because I do like guidelines. If you don't give me a guideline, you say whatever the DM thinks is fair, I'm gonna call foul. All right, those are the races. Moving on, you have your classes. Each class has an archetype. The archetypes can be fighter, domine, which is basically key abilities, which are basically kamehameha from Dragon Ball and stuff like that. Mystic, which is magic, or psychic, mental, which is psychic abilities. Each class is governed by one of those four, except for novel, which is basically the freelancer, uh, jack of all trades, master of none, jack of none, jack of no trades actually because that class sucks. All right, The classes are interesting. Each class gives you a list of things that you get every time you level up. However, in this game, when you level up, you get those things that the class tells you, but you also get development points. And development points are points that you use to buy off stuff. So this game is class-based progression with point buy. First time I saw it, I was so weirded out because it combines those two aspects. At least I haven't seen any other game that does that. Not entirely a bad thing because with the class-based stuff, you have the basic progression of a class, but with the point buy thing, you have customization, which is always a good thing in these type of games. I always think the more customization you have in your game, the better. More options, the least chance that there are repeats in a party. That's all good stuff. However, you have to buy up your attack skill, your defense skill. If you're a spellcaster, your attack with spell skills, your defense with spell skills, your attack with psionic ability skills, your defense with psionic ability skills. You have to buy up how much mana you have, Sion in this game, how many power points you have, psychic points, basically. You buy up how much ki you have to use your ki abilities. However, with ki abilities, you don't have to buy up how good your attack is with ki abilities. You just use your regular attack score. Something to keep in mind, I'll go into that later. Then you have the skills. Each class has favorite skills which are cheaper to buy. Alright? Cool stuff. But then you make certain skills cost 3 points, and that's very expensive. You get 100 points every time you level up. Starting up, you get 600, and then every time you level up, you get 100. And from that, you have to buy your attack ability, your defense ability, any mystical ability you have, any proficiency with weapons that you want, your skills, any resources, mana, ki, psychic points. It's a lot to keep track of, and it's a lot of things to buy to take care of when you have to buy your level ups. And here's one of my main gripes with the game. It gives you a soft cap, no, not a soft cap, a hard cap when buying things, which is nice for your attack abilities and your supernatural abilities. Usually, it's you can't spend more if you're a combat-based character. You can't spend more than 60% of your points in your combat abilities, or if you're a spellcasting type, you can't spend more than 60% of your points in spellcasting abilities. All right, that's cool. Nothing about the skills. Not that I have a problem with people putting all their points into their skills at all. But then you have people that put no points in their skills. And at that point, I'm asking, who are you? Why are you only a combat character? Who's your character's personality? And why can you only fight? Did you suffer amnesia, a knock in the head? What happened? You can only fight and nothing else. That's something I don't like. Because then you have people that do that and then they have no skill whatsoever. And if that's the type of game the game master wants to run, it's combat. You guys are in a giant cavern system, and all you're gonna do is fight. Then go ahead. But usually the games I play with my friends, they're more story oriented. We do have combat, but usually the last few months, combat only happens when it's necessary. Honestly, we don't believe in the concept of the random encounter. I have a friend that does something very cool. If we're traveling, unless he really wants to put a creature, we don't fight anything during the travel time. But he might mention you encounter a group of bandits on the way, you defeated them swiftly, you gain this much gold from that fight. He just described it in during the during the story. Described it during the plot. and that's cool. We then have to stop the plot just to fight a bunch of random bandits. But again, that's just a point of view. That's my point of view, and generally my friend's point of view. But I don't like that. Just make a character that's completely based on combat and nothing else. If there's no combat, your character can't eat unless you become a barbarian and start pillaging villages. At that point, you're evil. No alignment system in this game, so that's something I really like. Not a fan of the alignment system in Pathfinder or Dungeons and Dragons ever. All right, next up, weapons. I like how weapons are handled in this game. Weapons have static damage. For example, a short sword is gonna deal 50 points of damage. You might think, wow, 50 is a big number. Well, when I said at the beginning, might as well have been called Anima Final Fantasy, but they didn't have the money, obviously, for that. This game has big numbers. Remember, the percentage plus 298? That's attainable in this game at around level 9. This game is based around 15 levels. So yeah, you usually start off with over 100 HP in this game, health points. And I remember I had a player that he had a character. He said, "Oh, I want to be a tank, so I want to spend all my points in defensive abilities and HP." At the end of the campaign, they were level 9, and I believe he had over 600 health points. A lot of creatures don't have 600 health points, so that was very interesting. So weapons have a static damage, and for example, like I said before, the short sword deals 50 points of base damage plus your strength modifier. Because remember, the game does have modifiers. Basic stuff. When you attack, you attacking is an opposed roll, opposed by your opponent's defensive stat. Right? You roll your attack, your opponent rolls their defense, and you compare numbers. Simple. The main problem here is big numbers. Once you're comparing, because you have to subtract. My final attack roll was 387, and your defensive roll was 117. But you have to, because then comes the fun part. Depending depending on the result, it's how much damage you dealt. Because you're not always gonna deal those 50 points from your sword plus your strength modifier. It depends on the attack roll and the defense roll. So, for example, let me get a concrete example. I rolled 100 and you rolled a 50 in your defense. So I beat you by 50. So here's the fun part. My sword deals 50 damage. The difference of my attack roll and your defense roll was 50, so I have to reduce the damage by 50%, because that was the difference. 50% of 25 of 50, 25. 25 points of damage. Alright. But then you have places where you deal 75% of damage, 30% of damage. If you got a number so high up your opponent's defense, you can end up dealing 278% damage. So a calculator comes very handy, and a game master screen, because it has all those tables that gives you a quick math, which is a godsend. Thanks to Paladin that he actually bought me the game master screen when we were gonna play for the first time. Because if not, I would have probably smashed my head against a very hard object to get over the headache of having to calculate those big numbers. But that's not the only factor that influences the damage. You also have armor. And your armor works a bit like damage reduction from Pathfinder and D&D. Each armor type has an armor rating, ranging from 1 to whatever. Usually not too high. 6 or 7. And those numbers they reduce the final damage by a percentage. So if it's armor rating 1, it reduces the damage by 10%. Armor rating 2, 20%. If you have an armor rating of 3, 30%. So if I dealt 25 points of damage in that previous attack roll, and you reduce damage by 30%, 30% of 25. That's what I deal. So it's a lot of math. I have a couple of fixes. I'm gonna upload to the website soon. Because I believe this game can be a lot of fun, but it has to be simplified a little bit. More on that later. Let me not get ahead of myself. Alright, so like I said, that's how you do combat. It's an opposed roll. Then you have really weird rules where you have weapons have fortitude and breakage. Disclaimer: this is an optional rule that the game states and it gives you. But basically, what it is, every time you attack, every time you defend, you have to roll a 10-sided die and compare some numbers. And if you beat a number, you deal damage to the opponent's weapon, or your weapon gets damage dealt to, or you deal damage to your opponent's armor, or your armor suffers damage. So much minutia at this point because you have to keep track of so many numbers, whether or not it broke, whether or not it's still dealing half damage. The game does say that you can direct an attack at a weapon or an armor to do that, but there's an optional rule where it always happens. I have never met anyone that runs the game like that. Kudos to you if you do that. You're insane. And I don't want to be your player. Because you're a stickler. I don't like game masters to be that big of sticklers. Anyways, I digress. You have critical hits, which are hilarious, and you can end up with the funniest effects in the game. You can lose arms. Um, Getting an arm attached is really difficult. You can lose an ear, which doesn't really do much, but it's really cool, flavorful. You can lose a leg. Good luck running. You can lose your head from a critical hit. Instantly die, obviously. Stop looking at me like that. Um, how you deal critical hits in this game, however, is very interesting. You have to deal enough damage that is half of the opponent's maximum health. So if you have 100 health points and I deal 50 points of damage, that's a critical hit. Then I roll out D100 plus the damage I dealt to see what's the saving throw that you have to roll. Then you roll a physical resistance check against the DC that I created, and then the difference of that determines the critical effect. You see how it goes around so much? And that's why a lot of people don't like this game. They say that this game is a lot of good ideas, bad execution. I remember a guy once told me this game is fun, but it tries to do everything and it fails horribly at it. And I'll get to that as well. That's a lot of things I'm saying that I'm gonna get to, and I'm not writing anything, so I don't know. I'm probably gonna forget. Forgive me if I do. So critical hits can be very, very devastating, really funny. Then you have something called damage resistant creatures. And before I explain damage resistance, let me explain that usually when you're fighting another humanoid creature, usually they have a defense roll, as do you. Damage resistance, however, eliminates the defense roll. Damage resistance basically means you have a number, either a multiple of 5, 5, 10, 15, 20, 25, and you multiply your health by that point, so by that number. So if you would have had 100 health points and you have damage resistance 5, then you have 500 health points. However, you don't have a defensive ability. So what happens is your opponent rolls not the opponents, because at this point, if you're there's something that damage resistance, it will be a creature, um, opposing creature. Excuse me. You roll your attack with all your bonuses, and the creature only gets 1d100, and they subtract that from your roll. So you deal a lot more damage to these creatures. Of course, they tend to have a lot more armor. So it's a trade-off. But usually when I run this game, I almost always have damage resistance creatures because something I forgot to mention. In combat, if you get hit and you haven't acted, well, too bad. You don't get to act this round. That's how it is in combat. Combat's it can be very, very deadly in this game. So I go last in initiative. I'm ready. I have my great sword. I'm gonna deal 150 points of damage. I have a high attack ability. Somebody shoots a rock at me and deals 1 point of damage. I can't act anymore because you spend the rest of the turn defending, and that's exploitable. And I'll explain. The first time I ran this game, usually all I had were army men, spellcasters, mooks, thugs fighting my PCs. But what they usually would do is, usually in role playing games, you focus fire, right? You focus fire on the strongest guy. Well, in this game, what they did was there's five of us, there's six bad guys, each one attack one bad guy. That way, if we attack one that hasn't gone yet, they don't get a turn. They don't get a turn, we rinse and repeat. The bad guy never gets a turn. So that's why I like damage resistance, because it guarantees that at least the creature gets to fight something and do something. Also, in combat, you have to roll initiative every single turn. I'm not too hot about that, but I understand why this game does it. You roll initiative every single turn because if you get on a final initiative score 150 points, big numbers, over your opponents, you catch them by surprise. And usually, when catching someone by surprise does is they get a huge penalty to their defense. Although, the last time I played this game, I just scrapped that rule, and either you get them by surprise the first turn of combat, or you don't, because I don't want to bog down combat rolling initiative every single turn. And trust me, it slows down combat a lot. Especially if you have your 4 players rolling initiative each one after every turn, plus your 5 bad guys. And even then, let's suppose it will be just your 4 players plus one big dragon. That's still 5 rolls of initiative every single turn. And it slows down combat. Then when it comes to combat, it happens something weird when it comes to supernatural attacks. You have your energy attacks. You have your physical attacks. Everybody can defend against them. But then you have your energy attacks, and energy attacks can only be dodged. And now you might be wondering, all right, dodge. So defense, right? That's the defense roll. Yes and no, because there are 2 defensive stats. One attack stat, 2 defensive stats. Dodge and block. And I understand why. In reality, you either decide to block an attack or to dodge an attack. Okay, that's dandy. However, that overcomplicates things in this game. Because then you have to choose whether you're dodging or blocking. And here's the thing. If it only were that you decide whether to dodge or block at any given moment with the same modifier, that's one thing. But then you have that thing that you have to buy off. You have to buy up your block and your dodge separately. So usually what people do is they pick one or the other. That has its problems. Because then you have energy attacks that are attacks composed of energy, pure energy. they can only be dodged. You can't block them. You have no block ability. You can try, but the penalty you get is 150. That's a huge penalty. Unless you have an ability that lets you block energy, which you can get. Not at low levels though. So those are energy attacks. Then you have area attacks, which can or cannot be energy, but it doesn't matter because the category is area attacks. Area attacks can only be blocked if you can block energy. So just like energy, but you still have that big penalty if you're blocking without the ability to block energy. And even if it's a physical attack, like a volley of spears going at you and it's an area attack, you still need to be able to block energy to be able to block that properly. What about dodging? You can dodge at a penalty unless your movement, which is determined by agility, it's high enough. If your movement is high enough, you can dodge away and you are outside the area. If not, you can dodge, but you can take a huge penalty as well. Alright. Dodging is governed by agility. Blocking is governed by dexterity. That's why they have so many attributes, characteristics in this game. Then you have something that's called essence attacks. Essence attacks are basically an attack that you can't see. Done and done. Basically, they're also energy attacks, but for example, if I am shooting at you with a wave of mystical flaming energy, but you can't see it because it's just heat waves. The penalties you get to defend against that, it's almost 200. Good luck. You can get abilities that let you see supernatural energies, but that will cost you a creation point, so it's an advantage. So you can do that. You can use essence attacks as well. You can create abilities that are essence attacks. Creating abilities, I just said it. Alright, now we're getting to the big deal with this book, which is supernatural abilities.